introduce our presenter today, Dr. Timothy Kirby. And he's an associate professor of education at the psychology department at George Mason University. He has a lot of interest in socio-emotional learning and has a lot of research work on implementing SEL, and currently he's actually working on a big project developing a measurement tool, an observational measurement tool to see the implementation of SEL in classrooms, mainly in early childhood education. So if you are in the early, how many of you are in the early childhood education? Okay, that's a good show of hands. Because we were wondering, I couldn't remember how many of us work in the early childhood education. So I hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and please try to take notes. And we're going to discuss more and have your feedback and elicit more from what you have learned from the presentation tomorrow. But it's a good way to actually also, if you have any questions at the end, you can answer Dr. Kirby for any clarification or extension of discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the floor for you. And if I missed something, please go for it and just add to the presentation.
Great, absolutely.
But it's all yours. Thank you very
Hello,
much.
everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure to spend some time with you. So I am the head of the developmental psychology program at George Mason. So most of my work is in early childhood and elementary, but I'm actually formerly a high school science teacher. So I've spent a lot of time just in schools and around kids of various ages. And if there are some things that come up this evening that you wonder how it might extend into older English kids, I'm happy to give you my 2 cents. So tonight, though, I want to talk to you about emotions in the classroom. And so, I mean, you guys being teachers, you guys know, social-emotional skills we really value. And so that's really at the heart of the talk this evening. So, great. Before we get into things too far, I would love for you to just turn to somebody, or a couple people right near you, and I'd like you to discuss the question for a minute. What does an emotionally competent child look like in the classroom? So if we say that this kid is emotionally competent, like they've got these emotional skills, what does that mean in the classroom? Like, what do you see them doing that really sets them as being really good at that? So go ahead and turn to somebody near you and share your thoughts, and then we'll gather back together in just a minute.
Emotionally healthy, then the teacher, I would say, requirement or whatever word they still use this. If you bring them forward, like if they have some they are very, they're competent. So that's what I think. Do you agree with that? Yeah.
Go on.
Okay, this is not going to be an exhaustive conversation, obviously, but it's really to get the juices flowing, thinking about these skills that we value. What is it that we are talking about? I'm very interested in hearing a little bit from you. Would any of you mind sharing at least one thing maybe that you talked about? Don't be shy.
Okay.
Yes, please.
We talked about 2 things. One, like, if a child, like, someone takes their toy, if their first reaction is to just start crying versus using their words, show
Great.
emotional competence or incompetence. Or, like, a child who's emotionally competent and knows better how to stand up for themselves and speak up, so other kids are less likely to like bully them or tease them and things like that.
Yeah, and so verbalizing some of maybe how they're feeling about things of that nature. I'm putting a little bit of a different spin on it, I recognize. But in that
Right.
world, yes, absolutely, great. Yes.
We see both crying kids and happy all the time kids. So those crying, they get offended easily and they break into tears easily and they need more of attendance from outside. Where versus some others who, once they come to the class, they're ready to get hugged because they're so positively emotional.
Even just somebody who's kind of baseline mood gives you a sense of what we would consider competence or not. Like happier, more
Comfortable.
yeah, comfortable kids.
Confident.
We kind of go, yeah, that's more of what we want.
Confident.
Yes. So, another thought? One other thing?
Balance.
Balance. And what do you mean by that?
They can actually adjust to any situation in the classroom.
Adaptable. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yes.
Excited about being in the classroom and participating.
Yeah, so they're happy to be there. There's a little bit of enthusiasm. These are great thoughts. It seems like we're all on the same page here. Now, I want to talk about this just by backing up a little bit. And really, if you look at kind of the history of education and just its current standing, really what we see is that emotional competence skills really are valued. If you talk to teachers, if you talk to parents, a lot of the things that they say that they want their child to be are under certainly the social-emotional domain, if not the emotional domain. And so I'm going to start to parse that out a little bit more. Social-emotional skills are actually now included in preschool learning standards in all 50 states. That's a relatively recent phenomenon. And then emotional competence is thought to be the precursor to social competence. And so I'm not going to be talking so much about social competence, but I just want to point out that a lot of times we talk about social-emotional learning, social-emotional skills. And I think that's great. I love social-emotional skills. Most of my career has been spent focused on social-emotional skills. However, what I'm going to be talking about tonight is more like social-emotional skills, right? Really putting the emphasis on the emotional side of social-emotional skills. Now, these things really do go together, and that's why we do often talk about them in tandem. What we think goes on is that emotional skills really lay the groundwork for social skills. And social situations really are where a lot of emotional skills are learned. And so, I mean, that was evident in even how people were talking about their ideas about emotional competence. Oftentimes, it's emotional competence in the context of social situations. So, that said, I'm going to be narrowing down a little bit more to just talk about emotional skills. So when we researchers talk about emotional competence, what do we talk about? Well, we're going to say that there's some different views, but I'm going to present one of them most prominently put out there by Suzanne Denham, who was at George Mason, so I know her work quite well. I worked with her. And so emotion knowledge is one aspect of emotional competence. And what do I mean by emotional knowledge? Well, it's knowledge of their own emotions and other people's. So being able to recognize emotions, being able to look at somebody and just know how they're feeling by their facial expression. That's part of emotion knowledge. Knowing that somebody that they are with is feeling angry. This one's a little bit more tricky. Knowing that somebody else might feel differently than they do in the same situation. So, going to some playground equipment, like a merry-go-round or something like that, one child might be feeling a little bit scared, and then another might be feeling very excited, and recognizing that not everybody feels the same way, even in the same situation, is an aspect of emotion knowledge. And knowing how just other people or other specific people express their emotion. So, boy, when my mom's upset, she slams the door. That's one thing that I know she does. Not everybody does that, she does that. So emotion knowledge is general things, like facial expressions, which are pretty universal, at least for the basic emotions, and some specifics about individuals. So emotion knowledge is one important piece of emotional competence. Another is emotional expression. And this is another element that came up in our brief discussion earlier. So it's the ability to express emotions in socially appropriate ways. So mostly we're thinking about these basic emotions in early childhood: happy, sad, angry, afraid, and so on. But as children age, we do see these more sophisticated, they're called social emotions, coming online because they have to do with yourself in relation to other people, like guilt and empathy. So children are developing these skills increasingly over childhood. But not just early childhood, all through childhood. Young children pick up on, and their teachers pick up on children's tendencies to express certain kinds of emotions in certain situations. So they know that when something happens, or when the bell rings, that so-and-so is going to be startled, or something like that, where they can anticipate certain situations eliciting certain emotions. And this is the point that came up pretty clearly earlier, which is children who express more positive emotions on balance are actually viewed as more competent. And if you look at how they behave, they actually do behave more pro-socially than others. So there is something to that. So emotional expression is another piece. And then emotion regulation. This also came up later. So you guys were right in tune with where we were going. So when children have emotions, or not just children, when we have emotions too, we often need to regulate those emotions. And regulation can be a lot of different things. It's changing the emotion somehow, either intensity, like how strong you're feeling it, how long it's lasting, the duration, or even the type of emotion expressed. So if you think about a situation where you are sad about something, and you don't want to feel sad about it, and so instead you think about how that person has made you angry in the past. And so you kind of change that sadness into anger. That's actually a type of regulation. I'm not necessarily saying that's a great thing to do under all circumstances, but that is a kind of regulation. Generally, we are talking about, in classrooms, two different kinds of regulation. We talk about down-regulating emotions, so think about a child who's upset. It might be drop-off time, or something may just be going on with this child, and they're upset, and you're trying to get them to calm down. It might be anxiety, it might be sadness, or other things, and you're just trying to calm them down. That's down-regulation. But other times, we're actually trying to up-regulate. You'll notice I'm not sitting down today, right? I'm not trying to down-regulate myself. I'm trying to up-regulate myself a little bit. So these are things that we all do, not just children. And sometimes we want to up-regulate a positive emotion in a child. And so when we're reading a book, we might point out the positive emotions that somebody's feeling in that book, or something like that. Small form of up-regulation. So those are really the main three elements of what emotional competence looks like in children. Most aspects of emotional competence, most of the things that came up, even in our brief discussion, falls relatively cleanly under one of those three things. So when we talk about, for the rest of the evening here, about what emotional competence, when we're talking about emotional competence in kids, these are the things that I would like you to be thinking about. These are the things that I'm thinking about anyway, so that's good for you. Okay. Are there any questions or comments before we move on from there? You should feel free, if you have a question at any point, to shoot up. Yes?
So, expectations at different age levels are different, right?
Yes, in terms of what competence actually looks like, sure, yes.
So, when we discuss, are we discussing a particular age group?
So, 3 to 6-year-olds is probably where this is most applicable. Now that said, I think these basic ideas, like if we step back, are still generally true, but the exact like manifestation of it might look a little bit different.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes? Yes?
Can you give an example of down regulation in little kids?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So if you can imagine a situation where the teacher says, okay, I just want everybody now to just count to 5. Okay, and we're going to take a deep breath. Okay, is everybody feeling calm now? And teachers do this. I mean, they do it frequently, where it might be actually too much positive emotion, and the teacher's trying to calm them down. That certainly happens. And other times, it's a child who's very upset, and you're trying to calm them down. And a lot of the same techniques work whether you're trying to bring the positive, like too positive back down, or the too negative more positive. You know, calming down those, take a deep breath, let's close our eyes for a second. Teachers lowering their voice. You know, all of those things can help a child down-regulate. Yes? Good question.
So is emotional literacy and intelligence would be part of that competence, and how would it look like in that age group?
So, I mean, there's a challenge sometimes where different people use different words for the same thing, or at least a lot of the same things. Most of what we've talked about here, you could put under the same label of emotional intelligence, if you prefer that word. And so, I mean, what does a child who's emotionally competent look like? It's not that they are always calm. It's that they can calm themselves, or at least calm themselves with a little bit of help, if they're not way dysregulated. So it's like you can bring them back. Somebody who's generally positive, somebody who has a sense for how other kids are feeling, maybe some developing senses of empathy, you know, understanding the social aspects of some of these things. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about an emotional competent child. And I mean, I see heads nodding, so I think you guys see these children in your classrooms. And you also know that unless you're extremely lucky, you've got a few people that don't fit that, right? And you may wonder, how can I help this child? And I have some things for us to think about. I don't necessarily have any definitive answers, and I'm also interested in hearing from you as we go on here as well.
Can I ask a
Yes.
question before you go on to that?
Yes.
So there is an interaction between the teacher's social emotional learning, the level of her own, and the child's, right? So how would you
How would you
See that in action in the classroom.
Let me answer that question, but kind of sideways. Okay? Being a teacher is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a high school teacher, so I mean, I have some sense of that. But I mean, I think teachers work incredibly hard. And even when I see some things happen in classrooms that aren't awesome, I mean, I'm also a parent, and so I know that I'm not always, at my best. And so this is what I would say. I mean, teachers also need to take care of themselves. They need supports from their schools. And at least to the extent that I can help facilitate a little bit of discussion. Sometimes we don't know the best thing that we should be doing. And so some of my work is trying to find some answers, like actually in this situation, the best thing to do in general is this kind of thing. Now, tonight I don't have a lot that's, this crystal clear. But I think that you'll see that there are some things that we can all get on the same page about that are things that you should be thinking about when you're encountering challenges in the classroom. Because, yes, what do children experience in a classroom? They experience you, right? Like the interactions that they're having with you. And so, I mean, I think that you all are here in part because you want to be the best teacher that you can be. And so, I mean, part of that is discussing and so on, and hopefully I can share a little bit with you tonight that'll help you think about some of the things at least that I think about. So, I'm gonna accelerate just a little bit through the next couple slides. Emotional skills are important in a variety of ways, not the least of which because they actually help children learn academic knowledge. So oftentimes there's this sense of like, well, if you want kids to learn academics, what you need is more academic time, more academic instruction. And you see school districts doing some things that I think are counterproductive, like, for example, saying, well, let's cut out recess. Where it's like, no, they need that time. And social-emotional skills are kind of like that, where social-emotional skills, when kids have them, the classroom operates better, the kids are getting more out of being in school. And so we do see in the research that when kids have these emotional skills, they actually learn more too. So it's like a win-win. We should be thinking a lot about how to facilitate emotional skills in children. Now, this is how I think about how emotional competence plays out over time. So you've got these 3 emotional competence skills. Well, what happens like in the classroom? Well, what's the teacher going to see? It's some of the things that were mentioned. Less aggression, negativity, more pro-social and regulated behavior, more better adjusted, kind of this general sense of how the child is doing. And then how does that play out the next year? What you actually see is that they're more academically ready and they're better adjusted in general. I did a large survey of kindergarten teachers across the United States and asked them, here are a bunch of skills. What do you wish children came into your kindergarten classroom with? And they had to rank order them. The top, like literally, they were 50-50 academic versus social-emotional skills. The social-emotional skills were all the top skills that kindergarten teachers said that they wanted. So we really do value these things, not just as early childhood educators, but the educators the next year, they care about them too, that's for sure. Okay. Now I want to pivot here just a little bit. And I want you to, once again, just group up with somebody near you And I want you to ask yourself the question, what can teachers do to help children become more emotionally competent? So those are the emotional competence skills. I think we generally agree that those are the skills that we want the kids to have. But what can teachers do? So have a quick discussion and we'll pull it back together in a minute.
Could you go back to
I just want to
just like when I play, she's not ready to sit so I give her time to go and teach her. And I see her and then I choose her and one side and she does she move a lot. I find themselves and some kids are shy and maybe like so I tell them so autism is not like that. There's two kids' voices. I say she's very shy and she can't even pronounce her. So I tell her, I just repeat and then I say that so she's very proud and confident that they are able to do it, but it's not like doing it in their own way. But they have the support of others to stay. So stay there. So when I say, okay, let's do this, it helps a lot the feeling of their confidence. And then next time if I'm telling them, they actually want to be really proud of it. And then sometimes I give them my side and tell them that now you have to do a lot of this kind of things. And one part, so we play with the tell me what shape is that or what number is that or can you recognize that just to build it's not like conscious. Yeah, so I just like try that I think one by one, sometimes one by one. Sometimes okay, motivation. And keep seeing yes. I mean that's what I if you make good idea for each other, you make present themselves. Allah make you very rich. Allah give you so much it comes from that
Okay, this it almost seems like an easy question, but I think it's actually quite hard.
It's a hard question.
Because it's like, yeah, teachers should. Wait, what should they do exactly? And I heard some great thoughts. I jumped into a group, but I'm curious for you guys to just share a couple ideas, and then you'll get to hear quite a few of mine. Yes.
I teach a pre-K, so for me, what I tell them first, we teach them how to recognize their emotion.
Yes.
What I do, I have flashcards, and I'll show it to them, and then they will figure out like, oh, this looks sad, this looks happy, and I tell them whenever you feel something, come and tell me to take a picture of you.
Oh.
So I take a picture of them. That's in the beginning of the year, and I show it to them, and I tell them, what do you think this face tell me? And they will start talking about the picture in a way that they actually calm down like this. They forgot about what happened, and then they will start talking about the picture and expressing the feelings.
What an interesting idea. Write that one down, right? That's great. All right, other thoughts? Yes.
Are we okay taking pictures of kids in classrooms? Is it legally okay?
I mean, that's going to vary by the center. Some are more restrictive than others, and I would check with your administrator, make sure that they're okay with it. But
Yeah, as long as you're not storing it.
Yeah.
It's just to, as I mean, to
Like actually, in the preschool of my daughter, but then she prints out the cards. So they have for each kid that's in the class, they have like a set of a happy and a sad face or anger face or whatever. And so for them to always talk about, but print it out so they can actually
Their own picture.
their own picture for each
That's a
child.
very good idea.
So, just to kind of link this back to where we were. No. I'm building off of what you're saying. So what we're talking about here in these examples is facilitating emotion knowledge, right? So it's like, okay, well, what can we do to facilitate other aspects of emotion knowledge? What could we do to facilitate emotion regulation? Now, actually, you're talking something about regulation too, so. Other thoughts? Maybe one other thought before we move on, yes?
So tell them it's okay to cry.
Telling them it's okay, your emotions are your emotions.
Yeah, kids thought like you're not supposed to cry.
So,
Or you are a boy. Boys got to cry. That's wrong. We should let them cry if they're upset.
yes.
And talk about their tears while they're crying.
So how we respond to other people's emotions gives them information about their emotion. So, whether it's sadness or anger or even being super happy, how teachers respond tells the child about that emotion, whether it's okay to feel or not okay to feel.
Acceptable.
Yeah. Great. Yes, one of them. Yes.
So in my classroom, we do this a lot. We try to make them feel like they should be able to know that they have time and space to come back. That's great.
Yeah. So.
Because I think a lot of times it's with the instruction time, with like the academics, we kind of brushed it off. And we don't really, like in our classroom, we do this every day. We remind them to remember during snack time or during lunch, we could want to talk. We don't feel like talking right now. So I give them the space. If I see they're upset, look, if you don't want to talk right now, you can talk later.
So we're talking some about responding, and we're also, I'm going to broaden it out just a little bit, the relationships that we have with students also probably influences their learning in the classroom. Sorry, I'm stuck over there. Yes.
Okay, so for me, I've been doing this for more a year and a half, and it works. I think it works. I'm not sure if other teachers do. The moment I come to the class, the first question is, I say, like after hi, how are you, good morning, or whatever. They say, okay, we're gonna have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to talk about how we feel. So I ask them, each one of them, how do you feel today? So they tell me, each one of them, how they feel. Sleepy, sad, tired, happy, excited, very hyper, I don't know. They tell me whatever they feel. And I tell them the reason I'm doing that to them is to help me as a teacher. I will not give you too much work if you are not very well, if you're very tired. But when I say that, so this connection, it helps them to be very honest, and I tell them I want you to learn how to express what you feel. Sometimes they don't know what they feel. Say, okay, or I don't know. So then we keep doing this in the beginning of the class and end of the class. So 5 minutes before we end, and I make sure that after I teach, they feel good or they feel not good, and then we discuss, and we keep that every class we meet, and they keep saying it. And they're excited about it. The day I don't do it, they say, oh, we did not ask about our feeling today.
So creating some space for these conversations is excellent, and also the idea that you said this is a daily thing.
Yes.
So when we think about things that affect kids' development, it's really those things that happen in an ongoing sense, like not just once. I mean, if you want kids to be emotionally competent, you can't just go, well, it's the second day of the month. It's time to talk about emotions. It needs to be something that's more ongoing.
Yes.
And interestingly, and this may be more important for some of you than others, it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that exists in the curriculum. It's like you can respond. Kids are going to have emotions throughout the day, right? whether or not it's social emotional learning time. So how you respond to them, that can happen anytime throughout the day, and so on. Some of these conversations can happen at any point. Okay. Yes.
I was just going to say a little bit different take on it. I was thinking just to also, as an adult, to model, how to, and be honest, with our own emotions. Like, it's okay to tell the kids I'm feeling grumpy today, or my grandmother passed away and I'm really sad, or I'm feeling a little depressed, and then kind of modeling how to handle those emotions responsibly, not lashing out at the kids, or and crying, like as an adult, that's something that took me a long time to learn, that it was, like if I was crying in front of my kids and they said, "Are you okay?" It was okay for me to say, "No, I'm not okay right now." I think we try to cover up and.
So you struck on something very important, which is we all are emotional beings, right? We have our emotions, and children see those emotions, whether we want to or not. We have emotions, and children see that, and so that is another aspect. And I'm going to come back to this point in a couple minutes. I'm presently woefully behind on my presentation, but that's okay, because I love this conversation. I hope you
Okay, we started late anyway.
So, let me tell you how I think about, kind of in broad brushstrokes, what is it that teachers can do? So I'm not necessarily trying here to give you these specific practices, like do this exact thing, but I'm trying to give you the buckets that you can think about. Oh, if I do this, that would be this kind of thing. And the first, this work is based on this measurement development work that I've been working on for several years now, where we're trying to develop a measure that you could just go sit in the corner and watch the classroom happen and get a sense for how children are learning emotions in that classroom. So that's called the emotors. We're developing it. It's hard, but it's really fun too. So that's where my thinking is grounded. And to some extent, you're going to even see some items that we've developed. And if you have thoughts about that, I would love to hear it. Because I think the more input that we get from teachers, the better. But also recognizing that, I can only talk about just a little sliver of it, but we can see where that conversation takes us as well. So we're in our third year. We're actually going to preschool centers in Northern Virginia, and we're collecting lots of video, and then we go and we have a lot of coders coding that video. And we're kind of seeing how that instrument works. Is it telling us what we think it should be telling us? Can raters agree on what they're seeing? Because that's actually really hard, is having items that two people seeing the same thing can rate it the same way. It's surprisingly hard. So we're working on that. So when I think about the teaching of emotion skills, I think about 4 things. And these 4 things have come up, which is actually nice for me to hear, right? Because it's when I talk to teachers, it seems like these are the things that should come up. And from what I hear, these are the things that came up. So when we talk about the teaching of emotion skills, we do talk about teachers modeling. So teachers having emotions and children seeing that and learning indirectly because of that. We talk about instruction, so specifically talking about emotions with kids and saying, maybe having flashcards or something like that and saying, I wonder how this kid is feeling. How do you know that he's feeling that way? Right? So these kinds of discussions. Responding. So children have emotions, and how we respond back to them tells them about their emotions. And then relating. So this is the relational piece that plays out in classrooms, where it's the interactions that indicate or foster or facilitate an emotional connection with a child. So this is where I'm going to be spending the rest of my time, but it's all because we think these things matter for developing emotional competence. So it's all about that emotional competence. And these are the different aspects of the things that we think teachers can do to help kids. So the first domain that I'd like to talk about a little bit is modeling. So as we've talked about, modeling is the fact that teachers have emotions and children see it. They hear what we say, they see what we do. Now, I think it's also important to recognize that sometimes we're like intentionally modeling. We might be doing some sort of pretend thing where we might be pretending that we're really sad, or in a drama sort of area, we might pretend that we're an angry customer or something like that. So we might pretend to have emotions as well, and kids see that. But it's not always done intentionally. We just have emotions sometimes, and they're there. So kids can learn some things about emotions just by watching us. So I'll also point out that it can also be, this is what happens before somebody feels this way, or when somebody feels this way, this is what often happens afterwards. So both the contextual elements around what's happening. Now, when a key part of how I think about these different practices that teachers can put into the classroom is always kind of just have a ruler in the back of your head. So it's not usually, anyway, like this is good and that's bad. But when we were developing this instrument and just thinking about these things, it was always like, okay, that's good. What's a little bit better than that? What's a little bit better than that? So always trying to think about, well, this is what I do. Is there something that I could be doing that's maybe a little bit better? And so part of the discussion today isn't to, like judge what anybody's doing really, but just to say, well, is there something that you could be doing that's a little bit better? I mean, I think about that. I mean, I'm a teacher, and I think about my classes quite a bit. How could I do that a little bit better next time? And so just applying some of that thinking to teaching of emotion skills for kids. So when we think about modeling, this is an actual quote from an administrator. I think, sorry, it's an administrator teacher. We presented to both at one point. I think the other thing teachers can do is they can model for children. So, if something is frustrating, you can say, wow, I'm really frustrated. This is not going the way I planned it. I'm not going to get angry. Instead, I'm going to try a different way. Now, you might think, I'm just going to say that to myself as a regulation strategy. But if you did verbalize it, it would actually be modeling. Right? So it's an interesting thing how these different ideas can play together. Now, what I want to do is, let's talk about an example teacher here. Miss Kim doesn't show any negative emotions in front of her children, even if she's feeling them. So this is a little bit different than what you were saying, and we see a lot of teachers that think about emotions in this way, where I was involved in some research with Kate Zinsser, who's the other researcher on this with me. And we interviewed teachers, and then we did some observations, and something very interesting came out. There was a group of teachers who said things like, when I go into class, I put on my happy face. It seems like the right thing to do, right? You want kids to have a happy, positive environment, so you need to, no matter how you're feeling, you make yourself happy, right? So,
The kids know
but
it's a face.
something surprising came out is that when we observed those teachers, they actually had less emotional support than the teachers that just said, sometimes like, rough morning, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit out of it this morning. I mean, it could be any of 100 things. I mean, it could be that your kid's sick. I mean, it could be the traffic is really bad. I mean, it could be 1,000 different things that might upset you. Or you might be like, I had a great morning, and you just being authentic. Of course, appropriately, right? I mean, we always do need to be mindful of our emotions, and just because you had a bad morning doesn't mean that that's an excuse. But being a real, genuine person, even in front of your children, is actually better modeling. So instead, Miss Renee looks frustrated and explains why she's experiencing that specific negative emotion. Well, I'm feeling really frustrated because this is the 3rd time I've had to ask you to clean up. Just not making a big deal out of it, but just putting a label on it. And actually connecting the idea of, this is what frustrated looks like, and I'm telling you, this is what frustrated looks like, right? Because I'm telling you I'm frustrated. So some of those connections in modeling. So again, it's like, I mean, this is probably better than just being negative all the time, but being genuine is probably even a little better than that.
But I'm not frustrated with my husband because he didn't put the dish. That's not what we want, right?
But he really meant to. It's just he happened to forget. In our instrument, these are some of our items that we think get at modeling. And some of them clearly do. The teacher displays negative emotion non-verbally. Yes or no? Teacher uses polite language to interact with children. Now this one's kind of like, okay, politeness. This is a relatively easy item as far as we're concerned. We can be cordial. We can be polite. But man, if you're kind of snapping at people and you're being edgy, that probably says something about the emotions that you model. Teacher vocally expresses, labels, and explains their own negative emotions. Now, this would only be scored if we saw a negative emotion. But if there's actually some evidence to suggest that exposing kids to some negative emotions isn't bad, but if you're going to do it, it should be kind of contextualized and explained and so on. So when we think about modeling, these are some of the things that we think about. Any thoughts? I mean, we had a good discussion beforehand. I'm wondering if anybody has any feedback or thoughts. Yes?
I don't use the word frustrated, but I say I'm not happy.
Yes.
And you teach 3-year-olds, right? So that's very appropriate. By the time kids are 5, they should start to, I mean, if they don't already know, they should be familiar with what frustrated means. And it can even be a point of instruction. So sometimes when you guys don't do what I say, I feel it's kind of like angry, I feel not happy, and we call that frustrating. Because I want something different for you and you're not doing it. So you can even use some of those opportunities that come up that would not be modeling, that would be instructing. But you guys get what I'm saying. Great. Yes?
I have a question. When we express an emotion for the kids, we do have to teach it to say why this or what would make me feel better.
Yes.
That's the modeling part, is
Yes.
explaining it and what would make me
So
feel better.
there are different things that can all be happening at the same time. Sometimes it's just modeling and they see that, I just need a minute here. Okay. now that I've calmed down, right? So like they can see us do that. One time I walked out of the Apple store because I was so frustrated and my kids were with me, but I was gonna lose it. We walk out and I'm just standing there with my kids and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I just needed them." Okay, we're gonna go back in. And that's just pure modeling, but it can also be a point of instruction where you can say, you know what, I just needed to get away from this situation and take some deep breaths and give myself a little bit of time. And so modeling and instructing and so on can all work together to help children to understand emotions. Yes?
One thing that actually stands out to me like about the point A, like on 4A.
Yes.
The first teacher will express negative emotions, or the example with the Apple Store that you mentioned, is that it also includes the relationships, the trust. Because there's no chance that the child's going to take personal because they understand it's not about me.
That's a great point. Because sometimes kids don't know, right? And it might sometimes, at least appropriately, be good for them to know that it is them. And it also is good for them to know when it's not. So yes, being more open helps children in a variety of ways. Helps them understand what's going on. Because sometimes, I think we've all experienced, other people's emotions can be confusing. Right? You don't know how to respond, don't know what's going on. Right? And so being more explicit, I think, can be better in general. How much time do I actually have?
You're okay.
Yeah, but you have an
Okay.
hour.
Because you guys have been great about participating, but
40 minutes is okay.
okay.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. I have some time at the end where we can discuss more, but I also love this discussion as it's happening. So.
We didn't start at 6.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't.
Okay. Instructing. So when we talk about emotion teaching, okay, that's like the umbrella term, and instructing is just one aspect of it. So modeling, instructing. Instructing is when we are being explicit about teaching about emotions. So we're giving kids some sort of information about emotions. Now, some of it might be planned, like you might have an activity in mind where you are going to teach kids something about emotions. And it might be cards or pictures or other things that have already come up. You might choose a book because it has an emotional situation on purpose. But we also know that it can happen in unplanned ways too, where situations come up in class and you decide to take that opportunity to say something about emotions. Oh, you wanted to do that, but you don't want to wait. So you're feeling frustrated. You're frustrated again. But you want to do that and you don't like having to wait. So that's an opportunity that might just come up where you're going to talk about emotions. So Daniel Tiger, many of you I'm sure are familiar with him, has a bunch of songs that you might teach kids to sing as a way to instruct them about emotions. You might have emotion games. There's something really interesting, and this is a colleague of mine at George Mason, where she's found that, it's quite common in early childhood to have some sort of dramatic play center. Now that can be like a dress-up place, but it can also be something as simple as like having a kitchen, which is very common as well. And instead of just thinking about, oh, well, that's a kitchen, kids love to play in the kitchen. My youngest, that was a critical component of any preschool classroom for him. Working on him going at this big kitchen, he loved it. But not just saying, okay, well, we've got this nice center for kids to play with, but you actually assign emotion roles. Try this. Where instead of being like the baker and the customer, okay, I'll be baker, you be customer, you can come over and say, how about we try this? You be the angry baker and you be the happy customer. And give kids an emotional role to take on during the dramatic play. What we found is that actually helps kids learn about emotions. Because, I mean, if you think about it, you have to go, okay, well, how would an angry baker act? And they have to think about the emotional role. And in so doing, it helps foster and facilitate those emotions. So there are other things here. But you get the idea that instruction is when teachers are actively talking about emotions. Intentionally, yes. So, in an earlier discussion, it was on the side we were talking about emotion tricks. Can you guys see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. From up here, it looks a little dark. If you can't see something or whatever, let me know and we can get the lights. So, feelings charts. Feelings charts are a great idea, right? So every morning, Mrs. Suarez regularly asks children to point to an emotion. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard.
The confused one is interesting.
And this may or may not be a great emotions chart, but every morning, Mrs. Suarez regularly asks children to point to an emotions chart to show how they're feeling. Right? This is kind of what you were saying. But is there something that the teacher could do that's even better than that? Now, I'm not saying this is bad at all. I'm saying this is good. But is there something that's better? Well, here's what I might suggest. Not that this has to happen every time. But Ms. Thomas also has children point to how they're feeling each morning. But she also has children to explain why they're feeling what they're feeling. And occasionally asks what they could do to feel differently. So it's like, okay, you're feeling, you're scared. I mean, maybe something's going on at home and a kid's upset about that. Okay, is there something that we could do here today that might make you feel a little bit different? Is there something that I can do to help you feel a little bit different? Just getting the child to start thinking about that they have some control over their emotions and they can start to steer them. I mean, so again, this isn't something that you necessarily do every time, but it's building off of this idea and saying, oh, where can we take that? And giving kids a little bit more instruction gives them more opportunities to learn about emotions. Other thoughts? Doesn't have to do that.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Actually. So I've maybe read or heard before somewhere that anger is like the one emotion that is not, like there's always something underneath it. Like, like the iceberg analogy that says either fear or embarrassment or something. Is that true in your opinion?
I'm going to dodge the question just a little bit and just say, in general, we think about these basic emotions that occur very early. And anger is one of them. I don't know that I would immediately think that just because somebody's angry, something else is going on.
I ask it because I think it's something that teachers see a lot in classrooms. Like kids, they get angry and they hit or they call names or something like that. And so,
so developmentally, and some of you have kids, and what we see in infants is that there's like a neutral state, a positive state, and a negative state. Now, what do you call that negative state? Well, when they're infants, it's like they're fussy, angry, just upset. And it's totally undifferentiated. And what we see over time is that these emotions differentiate into first the basic emotions, and then we start to get into some of those social emotions, guilt and empathy and so on. So, but it's all differentiating from that general positive and that general negative into these more specific ones. And anger is one that differentiates earlier. So, like I said, I'm dodging just, but I'm saying lots of things, so it sounds okay. Okay. All right. I'm gonna move on. Is that okay? Okay. So these are some examples from our instrument, just to give you a sense for how we think about instructing. Some of these are quite long. I will just point out that book reading is one area where we think that it's kind of a natural place for teachers to do some instructing about emotions. And so if you're thinking, well, how can I just embed a little bit? Regardless of what your curriculum is, I mean, almost everybody reads books to their classes. So just choose a book that has some emotional pieces to it. Or, you know, those books are more than likely already ones that you're reading. Just pause and ask some kids, not about what do you think is going to happen next, but why do you think they're feeling this way? Just embed some of those questions. Yes?
And how does this remind you something happened to you?
Yes. Yes. Have you ever felt that way? What was going on for you? Just using that as a platform to have some, I'm not saying it has to take over the whole book, but just at one point in the book, maybe have a discussion about that. So book readings, we think, are an important, or a natural place to have some of those conversations. The teacher talks about regulating a past or present negative emotion. And the teacher helps children understand that emotions are related to prior events. So we feel certain ways because of things that have happened. And just helping children to see that. Okay. Can I move on to responding? So, responding is how teachers react to children's emotions. Children are going to have emotions, we know that. You know that better than anybody. So, how do we as educators respond? So, they can have so many different emotions. And a lot of times, frankly, teachers are going to ignore them. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But teachers certainly have lots of opportunities to respond to children's emotions. So what are we going to do with those opportunities? So children can essentially, if you want to boil it down, children can be encouraged in their emotional experience, or they can be discouraged in their emotional experience. And if you think about it, this may seem a little extreme, but a kid is crying, and you go, come back and talk to me after you've calmed down. Versus, I see you're really upset right now. Right? Two different responses tell children different things about their emotional expression. In one case, it's no, that's not accepted here. In another, it's I see that you're feeling that way is a one step towards acknowledging and validating it. So, those are the two types of responses that we distinguish between validating, where you're saying the emotion is okay, and invalidating, where you're saying it's not okay. You can get more minute than that, but I just don't think it's that helpful to necessarily get more minute than that. In general, if you're thinking about, well, am I validating or am I invalidating? I think that's a pretty rough sort of division, but I think it's a helpful division to make. Did you? No. When children experience invalidating responses, they learn that their emotions are not okay. Whatever it is, it's not okay. And then they're kind of in a bind. So, let me give you some examples of validating. Yes, this is exciting, isn't it? Why are you angry? So, notice it's labeling it, but it's also getting more information. You might be frustrated. to, but like, wait, what's going on? Why are you angry? Are you okay? What's going on? If you don't like her touching you, tell her. Okay? So it's acknowledging that the kid doesn't like it. It's not, and it's kind of saying that's okay. You just tell her not to do it. You know what? You can't find that? Let's go look for it. Right? Or, what can we do here? I see you're really upset. What can we do? Okay. And talking them through it. This is taking a step back, but emotions are complex and they're strong, but it can be anyway. And kids aren't necessarily just going to figure it out. They need a teacher to help walk them through it and be with them through it. Now, invalidating responses, again, I mean, I've been here, so no judgment if you've said any of these things, because I've said some of these things. You're just pretending. Stop acting like a baby. Come on. You're a big kid. I seriously do not understand why you're so upset. You were totally stressing me out right now.
These are all things that we can say differently.
And I referenced this one. Okay, just come back when you've calmed down. I can't deal with this right now. Now, again, we can relate to these things, but that's not to lift these things up. Because these give a non-ideal message to kids. It says that whatever it is that you're feeling is not okay. And let me get through one or two more slides, and then so I might be addressing something that you're going to say. Because there is an important point. Validating responses validate the emotion. You do not have to validate the behavior that is coming out of that emotion. You know, you can say, I see you are very angry right now, but it is not okay to slam that chair down. That is not okay. So you can differentiate between the emotion. No matter what emotion they are feeling, they're feeling it. Okay? And invalidating it isn't going to change that. It's just going to confuse them and not be helpful. The best thing you can do is to validate whatever it is that they're feeling without validating something bad that they might have done, hitting another kid, pushing, or a variety of other things. So, I would encourage you to pull those things apart. And negative emotions are okay. But it's what they do with those negative emotions that will get them into trouble. And I think that's a helpful distinction for teachers to be making, even at a young age. Your emotions, they are whatever they are okay. But, and you can take it from there. When we think about responding, these are some of the things that we think about. When a teacher perceives a behavior problem, how does she respond? Here we go. The teacher addresses the behavior without addressing the emotion. Notice that's kind of just the opposite of what I said. And that's actually what we see more of. So, kids misbehave, often anyway, because they're feeling something. And 9 times out of 10, we just talk about what they do. Instead of saying, boy, I see you're really angry. Right? All of a sudden, you have talked about the emotional underpinnings of that behavior. And that might actually help to change that behavior over time. Instead of just expecting them to stop, even though they're feeling that way. How does the teacher try to help a child feel better? sometimes we see like teachers start to engage and then they kind of go, okay, move on. But I mean, you may not be able to do this. Classrooms are demanding places, but what we love to see is that the teacher stays with the kid until the kid has worked through it. When any negative emotion is presented by any child, how does the teacher respond? So essentially, we put these into 3 bins. There are invalidating responses, there's ignoring, and then there's positive. We think that ignoring is probably better than invalidating. You know, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, like that sort of mentality. We probably see, and I don't have the data to support this yet, we probably see too much ignoring. Like, the vast majority of the time when we see a kid express an emotion, the teacher does not respond, that we can see. Yes?
Can it be like negative attention seeking and the teacher is ignoring?
Absolutely. So sometimes kids are acting out because they want the attention. But, I mean, this gets into some other developmental areas like attachment theory and so on. Wouldn't it be better for that kid to know that, yeah, you're there for them, kind of no matter how they're acting? And so I might actually think about that more in that relating domain, which is where we're going next. But having the relationship where that kid knows that they've got a close relationship, they don't need to act out. But that's going to take time. But I don't think ignoring is going to get you there. Yes?
I'm thinking there could be another response which says that I see that you're asking for attention, but at this time, you know that you have to wait.
Yes. So
I am going to ignore you.
So, but that's not ignoring. And that may sound like I'm talking out of 2 sides of my mouth. But if a child comes up and the teacher's doing whatever, and this child comes up and just going, hand on the shoulder, that's no longer ignoring. You've made that connection, and you can just say, I need you to wait a minute. That's just something that simple. It doesn't even have to be with words, right? And they know then that they've been heard. So that wouldn't be ignoring as far as we're concerned here. Yes?
I have a question.
Yes.
What if the child is not just seeking attention by being persistent or so you can, while you're talking in a conversation with someone, you can just put your hand on the shoulder. What if the child is taking it to a higher level, like maybe banging or tripping furniture?
So,
when it becomes, at that point it becomes unsafe.
yes, absolutely.
So the teacher has to do something.
Absolutely.
For the sake of the other, because he's not the only child.
That's your number one job, right? Everybody needs to be safe.
Safety, yes.
Period. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes, make sure that everybody is safe. Always.
Okay.
Okay, but then, I should acknowledge something here. It's impossible to do everything always at the highest level at all times for all kids. It's just not going to happen. So please don't take what I'm saying as like, you've got to do everything every time for all kids. But that said, there are times where we do have those opportunities and we should take them to have those conversations. So, yes, assuming everybody is safe and you need to restrict a child or whatever. But I can tell you, and this is getting beyond this specific idea a little bit, but what we often see is teachers are over-reliant on exclusionary and harsh discipline practices. So even timeout can kind of be overused.
Drama does help.
Right, there's even some, yeah, it's not always effective for sure. But like, sometimes it's like, we need to engage that child more, not separate them. And I'm not here with all the answers by any means. But there are times instead to think about, okay, this child is very disruptive during morning circle time. And so today I'm going to spend some 10 minutes with that kid. This is more based on some research at the University of Virginia called Banking Time, where it's all just about relationships. And it's getting to know kids on their terms, not ours. Because when we're in the classroom, they have to act according to what we think. But instead of approaching the kid and saying, what do you want to do? All right, let's go do that. And just trying not to tell them really anything about their behavior, just focusing on that relationship can be an avenue toward broadening out into some of these other things. So I think relationships can be the end point for these interactions that we have with kids, but they can also be the avenue through which we can get to some of those other things. But that's really hard, and I don't have like a prescriptive, like, okay, this is what you do, you know. But I would think about these things and bringing them into even your behavior management and how you think about behavior management, because behavior management, the child's behavior is rooted in their emotions. Okay, I'm going to try to just do this last construct and then we can. So, essentially, relating are all the interactions that you see happen between teachers and kids that over time make for a relationship. So it's like, what can you see of a relationship? Well, that's really hard, right? So if you think about it, how would somebody know that you have a good relationship with somebody? Well, if I say, how's your brother doing? He wasn't feeling too good. Does he feel better? Oh, that shows that the teacher, knows that child has a brother, knows that the brother wasn't feeling well, knows that may be upsetting, knows that may have been a big deal this weekend, whatever. So knowing personal things about kids, and the flip side, revealing some personal things. So not necessarily like, just always about your feelings, but something that you did that was exciting. On Monday saying, I spent the entire weekend in a classroom. Right? But it's a personal detail, something about you.
And I'm very excited.
I'm very excited.
I'm so happy.
I got to go to school this weekend. So, when we see relating, what we see is that the teacher is going and seeking out kids, right? So, looking for a child that might be isolated and going, I'm going to go make sure that everybody else is good. Yeah, I'm going to go talk to them. So, some kids are a little bit more excluded or just separated than others, and looking for those opportunities. We also want to see the kids seeking out the teacher. Right? That's evidence of a relationship. Individualized attention. Knowing personal things and sometimes bringing that into a lesson. Like, your dad is a
You have a baby brother.
Yeah, you have a baby brother. You know, so talking about some of those things. So, oh yes.
One
Yes.
example,
Yes.
like a child once came to me and said, my mom is sick.
Yeah.
And the child was so upset about that.
Yes.
So we made kind of prayer for the mommy.
That's
The
I mean,
child felt like this concern.
affirming. I mean, that's a responding element too, and it's relating.
Yes, they told the parents, and the parents came to, express the gratitude for the teachers.
Yeah. I mean, that's a wonderful idea. So, at drop-off, you can imagine the teacher saying, "Are you ready to have a great day? I'm so glad you're here." That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So what's better than that? Is your sister feeling better? Or, oh man, we've got something really, really cool planned. I know that you like playing with the water table, and today we're going to go outside. We're going to do that. Right? So it's making it a little bit personal. That's a relating element. And these are some examples. So I think I'll stop there, and we can just talk some about whatever you guys want to talk about. We can take some questions for the remainder of the time, and I'll let
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, so we've got 10 minutes, and I love hearing from you guys as well, so please feel free to share.
This is wonderful information and lots of information. Do we get a copy of these, or what happens? We couldn't take all.
To make it the PowerPoint, is it okay?
Absolutely. Yes, that would be fine.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
And just to clarify that I'm doing the right thing. So I have
I'm not here to, kind of like say, yes, that was it.
it's good to share.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
I have a kid who gets angry a lot. So I actually taught him something that in the classroom. I tell him, I'm giving you 3 chances. So every time I would call your name, you need to pay attention that you're losing 1 chance. And because before, if I say something to him, he'll feel angry and he'll make a face and cry. So I start teaching him, it's your responsibility now. I'm giving you 3 chances. Every time I say your name, you lose it. And I'll write it there. For him, on a piece of paper, I don't write it. And then he started learning. Right now, whenever I talk to him, he's like, oh, can you give me 1 chance? And the anger became less. So is this a good type of talking to a kid and teaching,
So,
Yeah.
I would say yes, you're helping, did you say him?
Yeah.
Him become more aware of his emotions. And that, as we saw before, just kind of acknowledging that emotions are a part of what they're feeling is great. And that awareness alone can be helpful. So for me, and this is consistent with how I've tried to think about this, well, is there something better that you could be doing? And instead of better, maybe let's think about like next step. Is there something else now that you've got that base understanding going that you could do? And I might try to start to, maybe we've done this already, but have some conversations about like, what are the situations that are happening that make him feel angry? Is it like usually something is going on? And starting to get him aware of those situations. Because we all, to some extent, pre-regulate our emotions, right? We know that there are certain things that are going to upset us, certain television shows that might make us upset, and we're not going to watch that right now because I can't feel that way right now, right? So helping children to not only recognize their emotions, but what's coming before, because what comes after you don't like. Right?
Yeah,
So,
he actually started understanding that, and he started recognizing what is the behavior that he does that it might catch my attention.
Yes.
So he started avoiding it, and
That's
that's how his anger actually got under control.
Right, and so that's great. So all I'm thinking, and I think that you guys can see where I'm thinking from, it's like, okay, so often we're going to just focus on the consequences. Well, what comes before the behavior that we don't like? The emotion. Okay, so you're working with him in the emotions? Great. Well, what comes before that? The situations under which those emotions. So if you can just push that back, you can avoid the situations and you can kind of pre-regulate the emotional states. And if you're helping him do that, you're doing the right thing as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I was thinking that.
But for me, it's never like, you're never going to be able to go from, way back here to all here in one step. It's always going to be kind of like, okay, well, what can we work on with him that's going to help him see this a little bit more, and then working back from there. It's going to take a long time.
Thank you.
Yes?
Do you mind addressing the research side of this, if you have any insights yet on the cultural nuances and the responses that you found with the teachers?
I have some half-baked thoughts, and part of why I was interested in talking with y'all is that, our thoughts are our thoughts, and we've watched a lot of video, mostly from classrooms, and I have a lot of experience being in classrooms, but there are some challenges, because emotions, pretty universal. You can go anywhere in the world, and people, their emotions look pretty similar. Some of the situations, like if you step back just a little bit, the things that cause people to be angry and so on are the same things that would cause anybody to be angry worldwide. So emotions are pretty universal. But the socialization of emotions, we don't have a great sense for how universal some of those socialization practices are. Certainly some of the implementation looks different in different contexts. And I would be very curious if you said, you know what, that doesn't happen. I don't see that. Or there's something that you're forgetting. Or maybe you're unaware of. In our schools, something. And so we have, we've gone into this with at least our eyes open to the possibility that we might be missing something, and we've tried to get feedback all along. Now, a lot of our thoughts, and this is worth mentioning, come out of the parenting literature, or some of our initial thoughts. These things are generally true for parents as well. And there are some it can be taken the wrong way, but I'm going to say like universals. Like modeling is modeling. The modeling that happens may look different in the classrooms worldwide, but at somewhat, we know there are some limits on this, but it seems like good modeling is probably good modeling. We're open to the fact that we might be wrong about some of that anyway, or at least it might be more effective in some cultures than others. Like even how we think about relating is that it's modeling, instructing, and responding that really are driving kids' emotional knowledge, and how we think about relating is that it's an amplifier. Okay, so if you're close with the teacher who's doing modeling, that modeling probably matters more for you. That's what we think so far. But we might need to revisit this. For example, boys and girls. Or there is some literature out there that does get at differences in like racial socialization. We can't connect all the dots between racial socialization and emotion socialization. They're just, we're into an area now where I don't really know, I don't think that there's much to be said from a research standpoint. We think that we're on relatively firm footing when we go out into a variety of classrooms, but as what I think good scientists should be, we're open to revising our ideas based on what we see, and we haven't gone out into hundreds of classrooms yet to really know. So it's kind of a weak answer to what you're saying, but it is my thoughts about.
It makes sense. It does make sense.
May I ask a slightly different angle of the same question?
Yes.
So the sample of the classrooms that you have, how much diversity there is in that?
So we have chosen to go into different kinds of centers, but so year one we developed the instrument and it was from one center, but we had hundreds of hours of video, so we could just, do we see it? Do we see this? Well, what about this? Okay, yep, there it is. But we knew that that was a restricted sort of view of classrooms. So the data collection that we're doing right now, we purposefully went into, let's try to get like a really kind of high income fee-based center. Let's try to go into a low income center where kids are kind of a Head Start sort of place. Let's go to a university, preschool. So we've tried to, even with respect to religious diversity, I mean, we have gone into a Jewish preschool, we've gone into a Christian preschool. So, I mean, because we recognize that those are also differences. We want it to be as applicable to anywhere as we can find, but it's that work is still ongoing. So we're trying to take steps. We also have an expert panel, I should mention, that has reviewed our instrument several times with an eye towards the literature on racial and ethnic diversity and making sure that we're not kind of unconsciously making choices that we don't even realize. I mean, I'm a white male, you know, and so it's like I know this about myself. What am I blind to just because I haven't seen it? That hasn't been my experience. So trying to get other perspectives on it.
So maybe a Muslim school.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly be open to that because I mean it's something that is there are probably some unique things that may or may not be something that we need to incorporate in order to have this work in any sort of setting. Yes,
so
sir.
I can follow up on this later too. This is really, I really enjoyed it, so thank you. But my question is, what happens if you are there certain kinds of modeling that, this might sound like manipulation, but can you create kinds of modeling? Is there research on certain kind of modeling that might produce certain outcomes? So I'm thinking of, in the parenting literature or just parenting practice, in our own practice as parents, for example, we had a couple kids who were real perfectionists for a while, and so the advice was casually, over dinner, over a long period of time, the adults should just start mentioning all the mistakes they make during the day, right? I mean, it's sort of manipulative, but it worked, right? It actually, like, we all, oh gosh, I used the wrong keys, I forgot my, right? Just one of the things we did wrong. And actually it helped the kids become less perfectionists when they started to see everyday practices. So I'm thinking, in a classroom, if what you're wanting, let's say you wanted more empathy, or you're feeling like is there research showing certain kinds of modeling might produce certain kinds of outcome, or do we not know that yet? And maybe this is better for the older age.
I think, by and large part, the level of specificity that you're talking about just isn't there. That said, I want to recognize explicitly that it could be that certain kids need certain particular practices that are kind of beyond the scope of this broad discussion that we're having. So from our vantage point, what we are trying to do is to say, this is how kids, plural, generally learn about emotions. And this is what teachers in general can do. So kind of like this overall, on average sort of effect. And that's a good way to think, because it's, well, you can address a lot of kids' needs that way. But it is certainly the case that there are certain kids that may be more sensitive to certain things and may have particular needs, and there are things that you can do, and we may eventually be able to address some of those things. But even then, it's not going to be a kid by kid sort of thing. Yeah.
May I just share my own experience?
Please.
So we are, I mean, from your point of view, you would say we are a Muslim preschool, so we're probably a homogeneous group, right? But from my experience living inside, the children coming from various cultural backgrounds. And a lot of cultures, they express their emotions in different ways. So there's one particular, for me also, I have to learn that this child who's crying and telling me that they have a stomach ache or their throat is hurting is actually expressing an emotion. Because in their culture, they are not allowed to say that this is how they're feeling, right? So there is a lot of impact of the family's culture on how the child is expressing the emotion. And I mean, it's an amazing amount of diversity.
Absolutely. And often think about like within versus between differences. And sometimes there are just as big within differences as there are between differences. But all I would simply say is that we don't even know. We don't know. I mean, I recognize your point. I agree with what you're saying. But we don't know the extent to which we see differences with this instrument. Like between. So all we can do is kind of say, well, let's target a place that might be different and see if we see anything different. Just so that we have our eyes as wide open as possible to all the different things that you might see.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.